$250.
I'm not sure actually if...
well, Michael Johnson, student groups do say that under the changes the Howard government made to that particular aspect, that standards of services have dropped. So what is the big problem with the proposed changes the government wants to make?
Oh, look, I think Mark's position is a bit of a furphy. I mean, I doubt very much that rural and regional students coming in from the bush, attending University of Queensland in my Ryan electorate, are willing to pay childcare services for a handful of other students. I mean, this is just absurd. Yes, students want quality services, but in this day and age, they don't want to pay for others to have the benefit of those services when they should be paying for them themselves. And, you know, talking about Julia Gillard listening to these students, I'm not sure, Mark, if thousands and thousands of students can be wrong. Julia Gillard did not initiate that meeting in Canberra yesterday. That was the initiative of those students and enormous public pressure, which is because of the opposition.
I think we've just seen the ideological divide really highlighted there on that services aspect. It's interesting to get those different points of views. I do want to move on though. I want to look at a few things we've seen happening overseas overnight. Firstly, the US government's released more information about nearly a dozen cases where CIA interrogators have been suspected of violating anti-torture laws. In one case, an interrogator is accused of threatening to kill a suspect's children. In another case, there are alleged threats of raping the suspect's mother in front of him. Really horrific stuff. Overnight, a White House spokesman outlined the government's plans there to start up a new specific interrogation unit and discussed President Obama's position on prosecuting interrogators. Let's take a look.
The President's view is that intelligence gathering is best left to the intelligence community, and this is a way that the intelligence community can best operate, especially in these high-value instances. Well, as the President has said repeatedly, he thinks that we should be looking forward, not backward. He does agree with the Attorney General that anyone who conducted actions that had been sanctioned should not be prosecuted, but ultimately the decisions on who is investigated and who is prosecuted are up to the Attorney General.
Now, of course, you are both lawyers. Mark Dreyfus, what's your take on this? How do you see the potential for prosecution of interrogators playing out in the US?
I can speak for Australia and say that we in Australia, the Australian government, are resolutely opposed to the use of torture. We've made that clear by ratifying one of the optional protocols to the Geneva Convention, and it will be the continuing position of the Australian government to be opposed to the use of torture. I'm not going to comment in detail about what's happening there in the United States. Clearly there's been a debate over recent years about the use of torture. I was struck by one of the speeches given by Senator McCain in the Senate about 2 years ago. He, of course, himself was tortured while a prisoner of war in Vietnam during the Vietnam War, and spoke eloquently from the Republican side about why it's wrong for countries like Australia, and I'd say the United States as well, to even contemplate the use of torture. I hope that the new American administration can resolve this. I'd be inclined to agree perhaps with the President's spokesman there that you don't always profit by examining closely what happened in the past, but what I'm encouraged by is the resolute stance that's been taken by the new American administration against torture, which accords with the view that we take here in Australia.
Michael Johnson, I assume you would probably agree with a lot of that, but what about the actual idea of prosecuting some of these CIA interrogators?
Oh, look, actually, I'm glad to say that I'm on the same page as Mark here. I think that there is a very limited place for torture, and certainly where that torture takes place, it must be done in an appropriate way and in an appropriate context. Look, this is very difficult. We've got to remember that all this has happened in the context of 9/11, in an environment of global terrorism, and we've got to be very careful that in maintaining appropriate civil rights and human rights, that we don't forget that the whole context of this has taken place in a global environment of terrorism. There's no way in the world that the Western democratic world can and should allow terrorism to flourish. But I think that can happen with, as Mark says, resolute principles that we abide by.
And I've got to say, actually, I'm shocked to hear Michael say that there's a limited place for torture, which is what I think I just heard him say. I think we need to resolutely say that there is no place for torture. And
Michael
we've
Johnson,
got to...
do you agree with that?
No, I don't, because I think it's how you define torture. And you know, Mark's a Queen's Counsel. He would know better than me. I was just a humble junior barrister. But it's how you define torture, and that is, I think, the key point that needs to be explained to the public, as well as to the international community.
One final issue I want to get to, of course, we've seen a lot of discussion about Australia's relationship with China. Michael Johnson, you're up in Beijing quite a bit. What's your take on how the Chinese are feeling about Australia and the government right now?
Well, I'm certainly no Mandarin expert like Mr. Rudd. I try to go to China as often as I can, as often as is politically acceptable. But look, this is a very key relationship for this country. We have to nurture it. We have to ensure that our future prosperity is maintained through our relationship with China. At the same time, the different value set that China has to ours is something that we must not shun away from. We are a fantastic democracy. China is a one-party state. I think that skillful management can bring those two elements together. They can be reconciled so that this country's economic prosperity is secure. But let's make no mistake about it. To those who think differently, China's place in the world is absolutely assured. China is an emerging power, and we have got to be very aware of that development.
Mark Dreyfus, would you acknowledge that diplomatic relations with China right now are worse than they ever were under John Howard's government?
Certainly not, Ashley, and I'd have to comment on what Michael's just said, and acknowledging the need for sensitivity in the relationship with the Chinese. The way in which Michael just put it was a lot better than the muddled thinking that we've heard recently from the Coalition's Foreign Affairs spokesman Julie Bishop, who has been all over the place. And indeed, what we've just heard from Michael was a lot better than the muddled position adopted by the former minister in the Howard government, Philip Ruddock, who said that it was a mistake for Australia to have issued a visa to the Uyghur leader Rabia Kadir. I think it would be a very sad day for Australia if we were ever to give over the right to decide who comes to Australia on a visa to another country. And I'd perhaps just to compliment Michael, say it would be preferable if we heard a bit more of the balance that he's just expressed from those in more senior positions in his party, particularly the Foreign Affairs spokesman Julie Bishop, who doesn't seem to know whether she's coming or going in relation to our relationship with China.
Well, we have run out of time. Michael, I'll do your job for you and defend the former AG, Philip Ruddock, there, because he says that those comments were taken completely out of context and says that he's never argued that Rabia Kadir should not have been given a visa. But Michael Johnson, Mark Dreyfus, thank you for your time this morning. Thanks for joining us on AM Agenda.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thanks, Ashley. Cheers.
And Kieran Gilbert will be along with PM Agenda this afternoon at 4:15 Eastern. I'll see you again for AM Agenda tomorrow morning. Until then, I'm Ashley Gillen. Thanks for your company.